Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much indeed for joining us today on this special speech from Mr. Liu Xiaoming, the Ambassador of the People's Republic of China to the UK. He will be speaking to us for 20 minutes. My name is David Marsh of OMFIF. I will have also on the line Charles Grant, who is the Director of the Centre for European Reform, who will be speaking about the issue today, which is the relations between China and Europe. This is a relatively short cast of just 1 hour and 10 minutes. The ambassador will be speaking for 20 minutes, and then Charles will speak for about 8 minutes on the subject of Europe and China. We will then have a Q&A. I'd like to just simply remind people of the camera etiquette. We will turn you on and unmute you when your turn has come. We've got a running order of questions, so people know roughly in what order they should be asking questions. We ask for questions and the answers, please, Mr. Ambassador, to be kept fairly brief because there's a lot to discuss today. This is all totally on the record. So I'm going to turn over straight away to Mr. Ambassador. Thank you for being here and looking forward very much to what you have to say.
David, Charles, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. It's really a delight to join you online to talk about China-Europe relations after the pandemic. As you all know, that this year marks the 45th anniversary of China-EU diplomatic relations. In the past 45 years, China's relationship with Europe has become increasingly comprehensive, mature, and steady. This relationship has delivered tangible benefits to the people of both sides and contributed positive energy to world peace and prosperity. Last month, the 22nd China-Europe Summit was held online. President Xi Jinping had a meeting with President Charles Michel and President von der Leyen. And Premier Li Keqiang co-chaired the summit with the two presidents. These meetings charted the course for the relationship between China and Europe after the pandemic. As COVID-19 continues ravaging the world, the international landscape and global governance system faced profound changes. This most serious pandemic in a century has revealed 4 global deficits. First, the health deficit. COVID-19 has spread to more than 210 countries and regions, affecting more than 7 billion people, infecting over 13 million people, and claiming over 560,000 lives. This is the gravest global public health emergency after the Second World War. It poses severe challenge to the safety and health of mankind and requires the joint response of international community, including China and Europe. Second, the development deficit. This pandemic has resulted in a severe recession in world economy. According to OECD forecast, European economy will be the hardest hit this year. The IMF and the World Bank predicted respectively 4.9% and 5.2% contraction in the world economy this year. How to achieve economic recovery and continued growth is a daunting task for all countries, including China and Europe. Third, the peace deficit. The pandemic has aggravated the severe challenges from incessant regional conflicts and wars, raging terrorism, and grave humanitarian crisis. World peace and security and stability are under grave threat. Fourth, the governance deficit. The pandemic has revealed the weak links in global public health governance system. COVID-19 reminds the world that mankind belongs to a community with a shared future. Scapegoating, shirking responsibilities are unhelpful to solving problems and saving lives. Solidarity and cooperation are the only right way forward in this fight against the virus. Both China and Europe are major global players. It is important that the two sides join hands to contribute to global response to COVID-19, to world economic recovery, to improving global governance, and to overturning the deficits. First, China and Europe should work together to safeguard the health and safety of mankind. China attaches great importance to cooperation with the international community, including Europe, on fighting the pandemic. At the 73rd World Health Assembly last May, President Xi Jinping called for the building of a global community of health for all. He also announced that in the coming 2 years, China will provide $2 billion in international aid. When China is successful in developing a vaccine and put it to use, China will make it a global public good. China also took an active part in coronavirus global response pledging conference initiated by the EU and the Global Vaccine Summit hosted by the UK. Going forward, China and EU should continue sharing experience in epidemic containment, enhance cooperation on R&D of vaccine and medicines, strengthen support to regions with weak public health systems, and actively explore tri-party cooperation between China, the EU, and Africa in epidemic response. Together, China and the EU could help strengthen global defense against threats to public health and contribute to building a global community of health for all. Second, China and Europe should work together to uphold world peace and stability. China and EU have between them 1/10 of the world's land area, 1/4 of the world's population, and the 3 permanent members of UN Security Council. There's every reason that China and EU should play a key role in safeguarding world peace and stability. China and Europe should enhance strategic dialogue to step up coordination and communication on major international and regional issues. This includes supporting the settlement of all hotspot issues, regional conflicts through peaceful dialogue and consultation, upholding global non-proliferation regime so as to safeguard global strategic stability, supporting measures aimed at striking down the terrorism of all kinds. Third, China and Europe should work together to promote development and prosperity in the world. China and EU, as the 2 major economies, should be the dual engines of the world economy that drive economic recovery, bring economic activities back on track in an orderly manner, and safeguard the open, stable, and secure global industrial and supply chains. To achieve these goals, China and Europe should enhance coordination on macroeconomic policies and uphold an open world economy. The 2 sides should stay open to each other and strive to complete negotiations on China-EU investment agreement with a view to reaching a comprehensive, balanced, and high-standard agreement. Fourth, China and Europe should work together to improve global governance system. China and EU are both committed to multilateralism. Both safeguard the international system with the UN at its core, and international order based on international law, and the multilateral trade system with the WTO as its cornerstone. Both support the WHO in playing a leading role in global response to COVID-19. The two sides share common interests in safeguarding global public health, tackling climate change, developing clean energy, clean transport, and clean technology, and preserving biodiversity. The two sides have a broad consensus on advancing reforms in WTO and upholding free trade. In this year, that marks the 75th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations, China and Europe should work together to enhance communication and coordination, safeguard multilateralism, and improve global governance. Ladies and gentlemen, in the 45 years of China-EU diplomatic relations, win-win cooperation has been the main theme. In face of new challenges brought by the pandemic, this relationship has some new problems to solve. By this I mean the misgivings and doubts of sub-politicians in Europe who see China as a systematic rival, regard China as a potentially hostile state, and believe there will be no going back to business as usual with China. So now China and Europe have the same questions before us. What kind of relationship do we want post-pandemic? What should we do to preserve the overall interests of China-Europe relations? In my opinion, China and Europe should pull together in the following four aspects. First, respect each other and reject interference in others' countries' internal affairs. Mutual respect for sovereignty and territorial integrity, non-interference in other countries' internal affairs, equality, and mutual benefit are the basis and the basic principles enshrined in the UN Charter and the basic norms governing international relations. Experience of the past 45 years since China and the EU established diplomatic relations has told us that when these principles were upheld, China-Europe relationship would make progress. Otherwise, this relationship would suffer setbacks or even retrogression. China has never interfered in other countries' internal affairs, and we strongly oppose interference in China's internal affairs by any countries. Last month, the Standing Committee of China's National People's Congress adopted the national security law for Hong Kong to deal with the enormous risk Hong Kong faces in safeguarding national security. The law plugs the legal loophole in terms of national security in Hong Kong. It targets a very few actions and activities that gravely jeopardize national security. It would not affect the high degree of autonomy of Hong Kong. It will not change Hong Kong's independent judicial power, including the power of final adjudication. It will provide better safeguards for rights and freedoms of Hong Kong people. It will ensure a better protection for the legitimate rights and interests of foreign investors in the city. It is not surprising that national security law for Hong Kong has been warmly welcomed by Hong Kong residents. Nearly 3 million Hong Kong citizens have signed the petition in support of the law. More than 70 countries in the world, including some European countries, have voiced their support. However, some European politicians have made irresponsible remarks regarding this law to interfere in Hong Kong's affairs, which are internal affairs of China. It is my hope that EU will view the national security law for Hong Kong from an objective, reasonable, and fair perspective. Take concrete steps to observe international law and basic norms governing international relations, and stop interfering in Hong Kong's affairs, which are internal affairs of China. Second, China and Europe should see each other as partners and abandon the Cold War mentality. China and EU have established comprehensive strategic partnership. The two sides are building a partnership for peace, growth, reform, and civilization. China will always pursue peaceful development. It is committed to peaceful coexistence, mutually beneficial cooperation, and a common development with all countries, including European countries. It has always seen Europe as an equal partner rather than rival. Between China and Europe, there's no geopolitical discord or conflict in fundamental interests. There's more cooperation than rivalry, more consensus than differences. Those who see China as a systematic rival or a potentially hostile state have got it all wrong. They've chosen the wrong target, and they are heading in the wrong direction. What China cares most is to improve the well-being of the Chinese people. China's priority is to realize national rejuvenation. And for this purpose, China aspires a peaceful and stable world. It is important that China and Europe facilitate each other's success in a positive cycle, rather than engaging in a knockout match where one side's gain is built on the other side's loss. Third, China and Europe should seize the opportunities of each other's development and reject zero-sum game. China's development creates opportunities rather than challenges, still less threats to Europe. China and Europe are the two major markets of the world, account for 1/3 of the world's total economy. The two sides are each other's second largest trading partner, and the two economies are highly complementary. As China deepens reform and opens its market wider to the world, China-Europe cooperation will face more promising prospects. I'm confident that mutually beneficial cooperation between China and Europe will not only deliver more benefits to the peoples of two sides, but also provide greater stability and predictability for a world that is full of uncertainty. Fourth, China and Europe should learn from each other and promote the progress of different civilizations side by side. Both China and Europe, as important birthplaces of Oriental and West culture respectively, have a splendid and time-honored cultures. The two sides differed in history, social system, and development stage. However, these differences should not become obstacles for exchanges between the two. Instead, They could provide the driving forces for mutual learning. The Chinese people believe that there's a harmony without uniformity. We also believe that we should not do unto others what you do not want others to do unto you. China does not copy the development model of other countries, and China does not export its model to other countries. The EU regards united in diversity as its motto. It values equality, inclusiveness, and diversity. It is important that China and Europe respect, appreciate, and learn from each other and support each other. As the two major civilizations that have contributed greatly to human progress, China and Europe should work together to translate the diversity and differences in our world into vitality and impetus for further progress. This will enable different flowers of diverse human civilization come into full blossom. Ladies and gentlemen, as an old Chinese saying goes, all living creatures grow together without harming each other. All roads run parallel without interfering with one another. This should be the way for developing relations between not only individuals, but also countries. History tells us that openness brings progress, inclusiveness leads to integration, and cooperation delivers win-win outcomes. I hope we can join hands to contribute more positive energy to China-Europe cooperation so that after the pandemic, the relationship between China and Europe will make further progress at a higher level and embrace a better, brighter, and more promising future. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those words, Mr. Ambassador. Let's go straight away over to Charles Grant, the Director of the Centre for European Reform, for your views about what's going on between China and Europe. So over to you, Charles. You are 8 minutes, and then we'll have some Q&A with the Ambassador.
Thank you, David. I'm going to focus on the EU's relationship with China, not quite the same as Europe's. I'm sure we'll get on to the UK, which is also in Europe and not the EU, before too long. But let me start with the EU itself. I think I share the Ambassador's view that a close and constructive EU relationship with China is in everybody's interest, but I am less optimistic than him about the state of that relationship. I think things are not too good at the moment. But let me preface my remarks on that by saying the big picture for me is that the COVID-19 crisis has created problems for the international standing of both America and China. America, I think, has handled the COVID crisis so badly without giving moral or political leadership, quitting the World Health Organization, its leader producing US first rhetoric, that it's really damaged its moral standing in the world. It's damaged its soft power to some degree. Joe Biden, if he's elected in the autumn, could repair that damage quite quickly. Now, at first glance, China's handled COVID-19 better than America. It's had fewer deaths. It's been more in control of what's going on. The economic damage seems rather minimal. It's had some PEP diplomacy that worked quite well. But I would contend that for reasons I don't understand, Chinese leadership has used the COVID crisis as a trigger for becoming more assertive in international relations. And it is beginning to provoke a rather disparate group of countries to agree that they have something in common, which is the need to resist the growth of Chinese power and influence. I'm not saying that China is to blame in all its conflict with other countries in the world, of course not. I think China is in some cases not to blame at all, in fact. But nevertheless, if you look around the world, China's become more assertive on Taiwan and Hong Kong. The Vietnamese are particularly more upset than they were about the South China Sea. Australia is in conflict with China. In Canada, two academics, Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavell, have been arrested and charged, apparently in retaliation for the arrest of Meng Wanzhou. In India, there's been a border clash. And then we get on to the EU itself, where I see in the 20 years I've been following EU-China relations, I think things are rather worse than they've been before. There is a lot of frustration in Brussels about dealing with China. So we had in March 2019 the EU declaring China a systemic rival and an economic competitor. And then we had the summit that the ambassador referred to a few weeks ago, where Ursula von der Leyen, the President of the Commission, expressed a lot of frustration about dealing with China. Now, the main driver of this on the EU side is a frustration in the business community that China is not opening up to European businesses as they would like it to do so. There's a lot of hope, there was a lot of hope that the bilateral investment treaty would come to fruition this year. The German presidency of the EU was very keen on this treaty. The view in Europe is that these Chinese are not fully committed to this anymore. There's a lot of concern about what is perceived as unfair Chinese practices on state aid, allowing Chinese companies to buy European firms quite easily, subsidized at home. And the French and the Germans have for a long time believed in building European champions, and the conduct of some Chinese businesses is giving them an excuse to move ahead with measures to reform European competition policy, which are not directly at China, but have some indirect aim at China. Now we have the COVID crisis, which has reinforced European worries about dependence on China for protective equipment, for pharmaceutical components, for rare earths. And the Europeans are worried about the vulnerability of their supply chains, which is why there's a new EU regulation coming into force in 3 months on investment screening. And it's why there's a new white paper from the Commission on foreign subsidies seeking to apply its state aid regime to third countries outside the EU instead of just the third countries within the EU. And so the general view of Brussels people I talk to is they think China seems fairly indifferent to the state of its relationship with the EU. They think that Chinese diplomats say nice things and promise all sorts of things, but don't necessarily deliver. Even in areas where we do in theory agree, like climate change and WTO reform, not much is happening. There are some areas which are causing real angst on the EU side. The cyber attacks against EU countries have upset a lot of heads of government on the EU side. The disinformation campaign, which has been exposed by the European External Action Service on the COVID crisis, the treatment of the Uyghurs, and then the Hong Kong business as well. Francois Godemont is a very eminent French scholar of China. His thesis, which I think has some truth in it, is this, that China could have encouraged the EU to become equidistant between the US and China. But because of the more assertive line we've seen on many issues, in fact, that hasn't been the case at all. And the truth is, I guess, China is scared of the US in a way it's not scared of the EU. The EU is not a military power, it moves slowly and it's not particularly united on China. The EU's never been very united in dealing with China. There are some like Sweden who take a tough line, some like Italy who take a softer line. But it's notable to me that the centre of gravity has moved in a more hostile direction in the last few years. Even in Germany, which has been China's friend in the EU, the business community is a lot more concerned about what they perceive as unfair practices by Chinese companies and lack of reciprocal access to each other's markets. Now, the good news for China is that the US and the EU, although they agree quite a lot on what they don't like about China's behaviour, they can't work together on China because the EU, although it's got tougher than it used to be, has to have access to Chinese markets. The EU has to be more pragmatic than the US. The US cares much more about Asian security than the EU does. And the US, under its current unilateralist leadership, simply doesn't want to work with other countries in dealing with common problems. Although EU leaders have said to the Americans, let's work together in dealing with China, President Trump has spurned them and the EU leaders are quite fed up about that. I'm coming to the end now, David, and I guess I should say perhaps one word about the UK before we finish. I think the UK is entering a very dangerous position of what I would call strategic loneliness. Trade disputes and trade negotiations, as we all know, size counts. And over Huawei, the UK seems to be picking a fight with China on Huawei and perhaps nuclear power, just at the time when its special friend in the US, Donald Trump, is quite likely to lose the forthcoming election, when it's burning cooperation with its closest trading partners in Europe, even though it agrees with those European partners on many issues, including actually on how to deal with China to a large extent. So I think the UK is entering a very difficult period, but I've spoken for my 8 minutes, David, so I'll stop there.
Well, thank you, Charles. There's a lot here. Mr. Ambassador, I'd like to go back to you now. I'm not going to ask you to go into details on what Charles has said, because there was a lot of reflections there. there seems to be a big gap, though, between rhetoric and reality, from what Charles said. Charles is not a stooge of the UK government. He's not a stooge of anybody. He's a very independent person who's putting those points. So that's the first point. Why is there such a big gap between, as he says, the nice words of the diplomats and what is happening on the ground? And secondly, he seems to be saying that you've missed an opportunity to bring Europe together on China's side and to promote a kind of equidistance with the United States. Why haven't you taken that opportunity? Because it seems to me, with Mr. Trump in the White House, there was an opportunity there which was staring you in the face. So why haven't you taken it?
David, you're asking me a question?
Yes, please. Yes, those two questions.
I think Charles covered a broad area of issues. I think I can spend next 1 hour.
That's right. We don't want to do that.
To debate with him. And seems to me he has a lot of complaints about China's position. And that really shows the benefit of this dialogue and conversation. And I think there's a lot of misunderstanding of China's position.
If we could just concentrate
Taiwan,
on those
Hong Kong, Australia and Canada, India, UK, European countries, cyber attack, disinformation. I hope I have an opportunity to address these issues. And, we do not try to cut a so-called wedge between United States and Europe. I know you are allies, and we just want to be friends with everybody. We want to have good relations with the United States. I always believe, I've been posted twice in Washington, D.C. Half of my 45 years diplomatic career is dedicated to China-U.S. relations. We want to have a good relations with the United States. I always believe that there will be no world peace, prosperity without sound, stable relationship between China and United States. But this relationship has to be based on mutual trust and equality. You need two to tango. You need two hands to clap. So we want to have a good relationship based on respect, non-confrontation, and stable relationship. And we are working on that. For China-Europe relations, we see, as I said in my presentation, I don't need to repeat them. We see Europe, EU, as a partners for China, not a rival. We see each other as opportunities. And I'm very pleased that China and EU we are the largest trading partner to each other. And there's enormous common ground, common interests to tie our two sides together. Either for global agenda or
sorry to interrupt, but in the interest of time, I think we can take those points, which are very valid ones, and we will discuss those in a moment. Before we go on to the Q&A with the audience, could I just ask you one simple question, please, which relates to the UK, but may also have some bearing on the other European countries, which is the question of telecommunications and Huawei. We've had the decision yesterday by the British government that we will go ahead, it seems, in the UK with cutting off that company from the 5G network within a few years, which will clearly bring costs to the UK. You spoke about a week ago about consequences for the Chinese-British relationship if that were to happen. What do you think will be the concrete result in terms of China-UK collaboration from that decision, which was announced yesterday?
I think it first undermine the trust between the two countries. Mutual respect are really the basis for our relationship, not only between countries, but even between individuals, right? When you look how the UK decision yesterday, I tweeted, I do not know if you followed my tweet. This is not advertising my Twitter account. I said it's a disappointing and wrong decision on Huawei. Now I would even say it's not only disappointing, it's a disheartening. When you see this company, good company who have been here for 20 years, they not only invested 2 billion in this country, created 28,000 jobs, and pay the tax and contribute greatly to the telecom industry of this country and to the local community. That you simply dump this country, use British media's word, purge this country. You know, it's very disheartening. You know, the way you treat Huawei will be followed very closely by other Chinese businesses. You know, when the mutual trust was undermined, it'd be difficult for the businesses to have a confidence, to have a more investment.
Will the golden era be upheld?
You don't need the government to say anything. I think the business, they can make their own conclusion. So I think the trust is a serious damage between the country level, between the government level, and among the businesses. And also, it's a damage.
Sorry to interrupt, Mr. Ambassador. The governments are important here. Governments do give a lead. Will the golden era between Britain and China be upheld, or will this now become somewhat more tarnished?
You know, golden era, it's really need the two sides to make efforts. You know, golden era is proposed by the UK side. You know, when President Xi Jinping was here, the UK leader proposed that we should build a golden era. When we think this golden era is a reflection of the level of relationship in the interest of two countries. So we embrace this idea, we endorse it, we agree to this idea. So we work together to build this golden era. This is the 5th year of this golden era. I thought we can celebrate the 5th anniversary of the golden era. But, you know, so many things happen. It's not because of China. You know,
let's go to another part of the world. We have Mark Burgess, who's speaking all the way from Melbourne, who's the former managing director of the Future Fund of Australia, the Australian Future Fund. You did mention Australia, Mr. Ambassador, in your talk. Mark, could we have you on the line, please? You're now one of the directors of OMFIF. Please put your question very succinctly, please, Mark.
Yeah, thanks very much, David. Thank you very much, Ambassador. It's nice to see you again. I just wanted to ask you about multilateral versus bilateral relations and the balance that's going on in the world. We seem to have slipped into a bilateral world, which I don't think helps us for global trade, which we all benefit from. How do we get that balance between multilateral and bilateral back on track?
You know, China is very committed to multilateralism. This year, as I said, is the 75th anniversary of the founding of the United Nations. And China, not many people know, China was the first country who put its signature on the UN Charter. And China has been committed to UN, the international system with the UN as a core. And China has fully implemented its international obligation. China never say China comes first. And China never withdraw from any international treaties. You know, we signed about hundreds of international treaties. We joined more than 100 international organizations. We believe in multilateralism. So we support WHO in playing a leading role in global, response to COVID-19. And we also increase our donation to WHO, and we work together with the European countries. You know, we disagree when United States withdraw from WHO. And we also support WTO as the regime which taking care of international trade. Though the system is not perfect, but so far you cannot find a replacement.
Good. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for that very stirring statement. Could I ask Martina Doyen now to put your question? Martina, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and good morning, Ambassador. The question I have for you, what are the prospects and the practical steps for cooperation between China and Europe on climate change, pandemic preparedness, and developing country debt forgiveness?
China is very committed first to Paris Agreement, still very committed to climate change. You know, this year is supposed to be the environmental protection year for China and UK. You know, China plans to host COP15, and the UK is the host for COP26. But because of the pandemic, we both postponed the two conferences. But we are working very closely with the UK now, online. I just have a conversation with the UK ambassador on COP26, and we want to work together to make it a new limelight, not only for China-UK relations. I think China-UK can provide leadership in climate change, and we want to both work together to make the two conferences a great success.
That's very encouraging. Ilka Hartmann from Germany, please put your question.
Yes, hello, Excellency, Charles, David. Thank you very much. Just for my background, before I came to the British Chamber, I used to work in the financial services industry, and I was in charge of international government relations, so I'm related to trade. And I have a question because the EU has introduced new instruments to screen Chinese investments and enforce antitrust measures to create political and conditions for closer cooperation. In Germany, the foreign trade and payment regulation was adopted likewise. And also after the pandemic, the EU called for action to diversify supply chains and shift supply from and trade from Asia to Europe. I listened to you, Ambassador, and I listened to Charles very well, and I can follow both of you. And it reminds me a little bit of the Brexit talks, because you both wish well, but it seems to be in a deadlock. We're talking in two different ways. And how can we connect? Because EU wants to trade with China, we want to keep you as a strong partner, and obviously China wants to do the same, but the level playing field of investments from Europe in China and what you request from China in Europe does not match each other's, I think, thoughts. So how do you want to overcome?
Thank you.
No, I think there's enormous opportunities between China and Europe, not only in trade, but also in investment. But the important thing is how the two sides see each other. Whether you see each other as opportunities, as partners, or whether you see each other as quote, systematic rival or potentially hostile. Look at how UK treat Huawei. So the way they treat Huawei is really, it's not, I always say Huawei is not about a private company. It's really about, the big picture is about China. How that Huawei really symbolizes how you look at China, how you treat China. During the debate, we listen to all these rhetoric. One of the reasons for the UK decision, people say it's that they have to succumb to its pressure from these China hawks and China bashers. They all regard China as a hostile or potentially hostile country. They don't trust China, so they don't trust Chinese company. So I do not know. When this trust was undermined, it will spill over to the business. It's not that we want to separate. We do not want to see that economic relationship has been politicized, but it's the other side which politicize the economic relations. Join the United States to sanction Chinese company, to treat China as a rival, as a threat, even as a hostile country. How could you do a normal business when the other side treats you as a potential hostile country?
On that point, Mr. Ambassador, sorry to interrupt again, but it's such an important point here. Before we go on to the next question, which will be Reza Mohaddam, are you saying that China is totally blameless for the fact that people don't trust you? Or are you saying that there could have been things that China could have done better in order to produce more trust? You seem to be blaming only the other side for not trusting you. What could you have done better?
We have to analyze the case, the project case by case. I think Huawei have done everything they can. They don't trust Huawei. They said Huawei has a security problem. Okay, then Huawei set up its own center to analyze the security risk. And the center is managed by British people. No any people from Huawei. You know, it's a British technicians to manage this risk and security risk. Then they make the conclusion, and they believe the risk is manageable, it's controllable. So that's why the UK government made decision earlier this year to keep Huawei, though there's a 35% market cap, but they still, you know, believe the risk is manageable. But they also try, you know, to improve their technology to strengthen the security. You know, when we say security is not necessarily from a country, even maybe from individual or from a group or organization. So they want to make a UK network, 5G network infrastructure more secure, more resilient. They've done their best. I do not see Huawei has something we should complain about.
Okay, well, that's a good point regarding Huawei. We'll go on to another question now from Reza Mohaddam. Reza, over to you.
Good morning. Thank you, David, and thank you to you and Richard for organizing this. And of course, thank you to the ambassador for taking the time at this interesting point in relations to talk to us. I had two ambassador, you mentioned Ambassador, you mentioned the support for the WTO both in Europe and China, but of course there is an impasse there at the moment. Some in Europe have suggested that countries voluntarily accept WTO rulings. Europe has said they are prepared to do that. So my question to you is, would China be prepared to join voluntarily a subset of countries that would abide by WTO decisions? My second point, you mentioned at the outset the very large volume of trade between China and the EU. Of course, a lot of that is in goods. What is missing in that relationship is services. And I wondered if the ambassador had any thoughts on how to increase the volume of services trade between the EU and China, which is much less significant than goods. Thank you very much.
Mm-hmm. On WTO, you know, China is forthcoming in terms of engaging with WTO, and but still we have some disagreement with the European countries how China should be treated. We still believe China is a developing country, though China have implemented its commitment. When China entered the WTO, we implemented 3 years ahead of schedule, and China is still ready to make further progress on that. On service, Europe, including United States, including United Kingdom, has your strength, and you have your advantage. I think that's why I said there's a complementarity between China and Europe in economy. We would like to have a more European service business inside China. And if you follow closely the new investment law, which come into effect by the beginning of this year, there's a lot of new policies with regarding to service sector. China service sector will open up wider, and there's many restrictions on service sector has been lifted. More foreign banks, European banks, UK banks can have more business opportunities. Insurance company, the cap has been brought down. The negative list has been shortened. Good. And we also lift the restrictions and QI2, RQ. So the David are very familiar with this term. I need to learn before I join you this session. Well, there's a lot of restrictions have been lifted.
In the interest of time, Mr. Ambassador, let's just press on. I've got a call now from Joel Kibazo, who worked for some years for the African Development Bank, is now looking after all kinds of African countries as a consultant. Joel, you've got a point, I think.
Yeah, Ambassador, thank you very much. I'd just like to widen the discussion somewhat just from the European purview. And like your meeting with the Europeans last month, the Chinese government, you also had one with the African leaders and African heads of state. I just wondered, you talked at that meeting, there was talk of debt forgiveness, debt standstill. And my question to you is this, that Africa is going to experience the deepest recession in 25 years. Is China, which holds a third of Africa's total external debt, is it prepared to help as we go forward into what is really an unprecedented crisis?
Yes, China is, China see Africa as a good brother, good partners. And make, I've been posted twice in Africa. I have a very strong feeling for Africa, for African countries. And we attach great importance to our relation with African countries. In terms of that, China joined it's part of the country we sponsor to push for, exemption of debt for the most, for poorest African countries. Within the framework of G20, and even during this World Health Assembly conference, President Xi Jinping announced as one of his 5 measures that China, will do more to exempt the debt for African countries. So on that, in addition to China's help for African countries, we sent many medical team to Africa to help them to fight the COVID-19. And we also help them to provide the PPE, the most needed supplies, share experience with them. And even here at the Chinese embassy here, I work with a think tank, one of the think tanks of British think tank, in
terms of the writing off of debts, is it possible that China will join the Paris Club in order to give a more formal way of rescheduling or writing off debts to the most poor countries? Is that something China could do?
China joined many multilateral arrangements. And also I think we've done more on bilateral basis between countries and China. We think that is more effective and that is more direct. With regard to Paris arrangement, I cannot comment on that. I need to consult people who follow.
Okay, let's go on to the next question from John Nuji, who worked for many years in Hong Kong. John. Do we have John Nuji with us? Otherwise, we'll go on to somebody equally well-known and with great deal of prowess, Sherard Coca-Cola.
I thought I was being unmuted at your end. I apparently had to do it mine. My apologies. Thank you, David. Thank you, Your Excellency, for your remarks. I'd like to understand a bit more, if I can, please, the observed change in China's international policy, the approach to international relations that Charles Grant referred to. What has stood out for me for the last 30 years is the position China has adopted of firm national views, honest differences with other nations, but mutual respect and above all, patience. Patience has been the watchword for China. And differences of views were, of course, existed, but they were not actively pursued. Now, we observe a change. We observe a growing desire to close unanswered questions, whether it's Hong Kong, whether it's Taiwan, wherever. We observe also impatience with opposing views, both internally and internationally. The wisdom of the earlier administrations, which was a problem shelved is an argument not held, an enemy not made, has given way to a more urgent approach. And the result has been a less harmonious world for China, a less respect for China, which pains anybody who is interested in harmonious relationships between Europe and China. I'm just puzzled as to why this has happened, why China has decided to abandon the wisdom of the last 25 years and adopt a more urgent approach to some of the many issues facing the world.
I would say China has not changed. You know, China is a peace-loving country, and peace is the DNA of the Chinese nation. And China worked very hard for world peace and stability. You know, China benefits from a peaceful environment for the past 40 years since we opened up and reformed. Why should we rock the boat? Why should we change it? You know, we believe that China will continue to benefit from this peaceful environment. But I think you neglect, it is the other side changed tremendously. China has to make response to that. Take China-US relationship for example. We want to have a good relationship. We have no reason to have bad relationship. But it's the United States who impose sanctions, who demonize China. You know, you look at this pandemic. Their president, their Secretary of State keep calling. Even yesterday, China virus. They withdraw from WHO. Who has changed? I think to be objective, I think people have to be objective with regard to change. On Taiwan, you know, we have a good cross-strait relationship with Taiwan when KMT in office. But when this Democratic Progress Party came in, they pursued this along the road of Taiwan independence. You know, that caused a big problem of the cross-strait relationship. And the United States tried to play this Taiwan card with us. They increased their arms sale to Taiwan. They want to give international recognition of Taiwan. They rocked the boat. We have to make a response. On Hong Kong, 23 years since handover. One country, two states, two systems. It's a great success. Why should we rock the boat? But look at what happened last year. You know, there's a turbulence, there's a movement for Taiwan independence, self-determination. They even call for reading this Union Jack flags, US flag, calling for United troops to land on Hong Kong, to liberate Hong Kong. We have a reason to be worried about that. When we say one country, two systems, it's a complete one set. One country means China restore.
Thank you for explaining that. It seems a bit like a marriage where the wife says the husband's to blame and the husband says the wife's to blame. It seems a little bit like that. But let's go on to Gerard Cooper-Coles, maybe a question in a similar direction. Gerard.
Yeah, no, Ambassador, very good to see you. I wanted to ask you about the disparity in understanding between Europe and China of the other side. I mean, building on David Marsh's sort of marriage analogy. I mean, certainly in the UK at the moment, there are were about 120,000 Chinese students. China seems to know a lot about Europe, but I've continued to worry, and yesterday's performance by Conservative MPs showed that there is a great gap in understanding in the UK and I think across Europe more generally of China, China's history, China's view of the world. Many Tories say they have no quarrel with the Chinese people, they just have a quarrel with the Chinese Communist Party, forgetting that the Communist Party has 90 million members, etc., etc. So I wanted to ask you, what more should we be doing to try and increase knowledge of China in Europe, particularly among those who make policy or form opinions, because there's a big deficit in understanding that needs addressing.
Thank you, Gerard. Over to you, Ambassador.
Yeah, thank you, Sharon, for your question. I should, next time when I prepare my speech, I would put the fifth deficit, that is understanding deficit. And I quite agree with you that there's a big gap between China, Europe, and between China, mostly Western countries. So each time when, you know, some Western countries, including Australia, United States, criticize China, they always say, you are widely criticized. I also say, you only represent small number of Western countries. You are not the world. Take the national security law, for example. 70 countries show support of this National Security Council, National Security Law. how many countries voted against China? It's just 1/3 of the country that support China. So I think the effective way is to engage actively with each other. I think we should not, people call this a call for decoupling. That is a very bad idea. I think we need more coupling, China and Europe, to have a cross-border engagement among the young people, students. We encourage. So after what happened in the United States, more Chinese students apply for study here in this country. We encourage this, but the problem, I don't want to see any problem. I hope UK will continue to be open to Chinese students. Will continue welcome Chinese students with open arms.
Good. Well, that's a very good way of going forward. We now have Andrew Khan. Andrew, please say your piece.
Yes, thank you very much, Ambassador, for your speech. I wanted to ask you about the question of interfering in the internal affairs of other nations. I understand very well the Chinese perspective and view on this and respect it. However, is it a realistic view to take in a globalized world where what happens in one country inevitably affects another? So let us take, for example, environmental issues, which you mentioned, and where China and Britain need to work together because of the upcoming conferences of the parties. But for Britain, what happens within China, which is a center of biodiversity and enormously important for conservation reasons, what happens within China is really very important, and Britain has a real interest. In the same way, China has a great interest in what happens in various African countries. And we have, when we talk to each other, when we negotiate with each other, and when we interact, we have to speak to each other about what happens in each other's countries. How do you reconcile?
Sorry, Andrew, we are going to run out of time in a moment. That's a very good point. Could we put it now to the ambassador? Thank you, Andrew.
I understand Andrew's question. I think both Chinese people and British people are smart and clever enough to distinguish what is interference into others' internal affairs. What are, suggestions, advices with a good intention. We can distinguish that. One, you have complaints about Chinese environment, investment environment. You have complaint. You have a opinion about the environmental, problems in China. We welcome your advice. You want to improve, China's environmental system. You want to make China's environment better. We welcome. We certainly can distinguish what are advices with a good intention and what are ulterior motives which want to change China's political social system, want to impose China the Western ideas, Western model. As I said, we have no interest to export our models, but we are also strongly against foreign countries, no matter who they are, to interfere in our.
Good. We've got time for just 4 more questions, which we should be able to squeeze in, Mr. Ambassador, before now and 10 past 12. I'm going to ask first of all Michael Maclay, and then Lord Desai, and then Pablo Riquelme, and then John Orchard. So first of all, Michael, if you're on the line, please join us.
Many thanks, David. Now, some of us in this country, Ambassador, do regret the Huawei decision and the current brittleness and absence of trust you describe, but maybe there are some specific things that China could do that would help to rebuild trust. Quick examples. When the WHO team come to China, will they be given access to the Wuhan laboratory, about which we've heard so much, not all of it mischief-making? Secondly, might China explicitly acknowledge the principle of freedom of navigation in the South and East China Seas? And thirdly, in public statements about unification with Taiwan, which you have addressed, but would it not still help to use the expression peaceful unification, which was always used by senior Chinese officials until very noticeably in very senior public statements earlier this year?
Okay, so David, this is the last 3 questions for me? Or you have a last word?
If there's time, I'll ask one at the end. But I know you've got to go for a phone call at 12:15.
But
there's three other people to go as well as Mike.
There's three are very important questions. I want to be brief. On WHO, you know, China has been responsible, transparent, and from the very beginning. China is the first country to report the case and the first country to share the genetic sequence. We really have nothing to fear. And I think it's other countries. We try to stigmatize China. And now WTO experts in China now, China is working with them. And we, as I said, we support WHO to play a leading role. So we are open, we're transparent. And I believe the two sides will have a productive and effective cooperation. But we have to remember to the research on origin of virus should be based on science, not on politicians, not on politics. That's number one. Secondly, all countries should be subject to inquiry to review, not only China. I think WHO also have a responsibility to find out why things run so badly in some countries. You know, the cases keep going up, breaking records with each passing day. I think this is
a very good point. Let's make it on the basis that we do it in a reciprocal way. And then I think that makes a lot of sense. That's a very good answer. Could I have Meghna Design now on the line, please? Somebody with a great deal of experience in between.
I haven't finished the actual question.
The Chinese economy has recovered very well from the pandemic. Does China have any plan to strengthen the renminbi as a possible reserve currency in the near future?
Yeah, China is very committed to internationalization of RMB. In the past decade, we made a lot of efforts, in order to facilitate trade investment, and more countries take RMB as not only a currency for doing trade, for investment, they even use it as reserve. So I'm very pleased to see that London is now playing a leading role in RMB internationalization. London now is the second largest RMB offshore market and the largest RMB clearance center. Hong Kong is the largest RMB offshore center and the second largest clearance center. I think the two cities can have enormous opportunities for cooperation. So on I don't want to miss the previous two questions. The free navigation. China is a country which are fully committed to freedom of navigation. 60% of China's oil supply came from South China Sea. We have every reason to ensure peace, stability in this region. And we work very hard with the neighboring countries, working on COD, COC, and the situation is very peaceful. If it were not for some foreign vessels, naval forces came here from time to time to threaten China, to infringe China's sovereignty, and there should not be a problem. And China is committed to freedom navigation, no problem on that. On Taiwan, China still committed to peaceful reunification. If you miss my article, I will send you a copy, or it's on our website. I reaffirm China's commitment to peaceful reunification of Taiwan. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah, thank you for answering those 2 points. I'm going to ask Pablo Riquelme, who's got a question, I believe, about Latin America. Pablo.
Thank you, Ambassador, for hosting this call. I would like to hear your opinion about the future relationships in Latin America, and especially with Mexico, being so close to the United States and having this partnership with the United States and Canada. I wonder if it's going to change going forward, or what do you think, if it's a friendly relationship, or how do you see it developed?
Yes, I think relationship between China and Mexico are very strong. It's very strong. There's a mechanism between China and Latin Americans, a summit held from time to time. And we would like to strengthen our relationship with Latin American countries. We are not concerned about Mexicans' good relations with the United States. And we hope that United States will not interrupt China's good relations with Latin American countries.
Thank you, Ambassador. Final question from John Orchard.
Thank you very much, David. Thank you very much, Ambassador, for talking to us today. You talked at the beginning about China-Europe relations. The UK has left the European Union. Does it remain part of your Europe strategy, or is it practically part of your American strategy or something else?
It's up to UK what strategy they are going to take. You know, I always argue with my British colleagues, we are not asking you to take side between China and United States. I'm just asking you to take the right side of the argument. You know, that's my first point. The second point is, I would argue that Britain can only be Great Britain when you have an independent foreign policy, rather than to be viewed in China or the rest of the world that you are just a junior partner of the United States. Look at what happened to Huawei. I think I do not need to belabor the obvious. They all agree. Even yesterday, Trump said he personally, pinpoint Huawei. He's a person, he made a great success. And look at what their ambassador is tweeting, and look at what their foreign Secretary of State is saying after the decision made by the UK government. So everybody understand what the reason behind the UK decision. So whether UK would want to build a global Britain to still exert a global influence, they really have to think deep what kind of role they are going to play and what kind of position they are going to take. We want to have good relationship with the EU, with the UK. There's no doubt about that.
Well, we will be thinking about that, and I'm sure China will also be thinking about it as well, because as you said earlier, Ambassador, it takes two to tango. I'd like to thank you very much indeed for being so frank and open with us. The final question to you, how much longer are you going to stay in the UK? Because we've got very used to seeing you here. You've been here for 10 years, and I must say you're quite a pleasant fixture to have on the scene, because you say what you think and you think what you say. How much longer are you going to be here, or is that not in your gift to decide?
First, I would say it's up to the president. As your British diplomat always say, they serve at the pleasure of Her Majesty. So I serve the pleasure of my president, and also up to the British people. They still want me to continue to build a friendship between China and the UK.
Well, thank you for allowing us to participate in that choice. I do hope this won't be the last time that we have this very good conversation, maybe a physical conversation or over a glass of something or other, rather than by screen. But I'd like also to thank Charles Grant and all his colleagues at the Centre for European Reform for making this possible, and also to Mr. Liu and all the other warriors at the Chinese embassy for helping to put on this very interesting display. We haven't got to the bottom of a lot of those questions, but we will persevere. And that point about understanding is so important that you've made. And that means both sides have to make efforts, I believe. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Ambassador. Thank you, everybody who's been on the line. And thank you all the technical staff who've been helping tremendously to make this a success. So it's David Marsh here on behalf of Charles Grant saying goodbye, Mr. Ambassador. We hope that you will remain with us for quite a while to come so you can carry on with this dialogue.